BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello, I'm Jane Lewis. It's Thursday the 28th of November and this is a bumper European edition of the Scottish Football Podcast.
Carter Vickers and his penalty and he's passed into the bottom corner of the net. It's absolutely calamitous from the Celtic centre-back. He blindly passes it back to his goalkeeper and it is an absolute gift for Club Brugge.
Celtic aren't quite as slick in their latest Champions League match, but they do rescue a point. And there's more Scottish interest in Europe. It's a busy Thursday night ahead.
Sevilla now with time to measure across. Dalby's completely unmarked and United have the lead. He had the absolute freedom of the penalty area.
From the south side of Glasgow to the south of France, can Rangers put their domestic woes behind them in Nice? And what can Hearts expect as they travel to Bruges?
A kind of combination of circumstances really have worked against them. There have been some signs in recent weeks of an improvement in form, but it's not really digging them out of certainly that relegation zone that they're kind of sitting in and around at the moment.
The Scottish Football Podcast from BBC Sports Scotland.
Well, Asim Rabbani from the Celtic State of Mind is with us. So too Joshua Barrie, the editor of the Rangers Review. Both up for this one, boys. How are we feeling?
Yes.
Yeah, all good over here. Looking forward to it.
Good stuff. Plenty to discuss with you both. And we're also going to be hearing from the Belgian football expert Scott Coyne about what Hearts can expect from Cercle Brugge. But let's start with last night's game at Parkhead, where Celtic rescued a point after a Carter Vickers own goal in the 26th minute. Well, Asim, what did you make of last night's result? And maybe more pertinently, what did you make of Celtic's performance last night?
Hi Jane. Yeah, you mentioned at the start there, Celtic weren't at their slick best that they've been this season. Definitely a really kind of flat opening half, especially. Club Brugge would have felt that they were justified going in 1-up. But the performance did improve second half. I think the overall feeling leaving the stadium was pretty content, and I think the one each draw was a fair result on reflection, and not the worst result in terms of where it leaves Celtic in the group.
Yeah, it wasn't a bad result at all. When you think of a draw in Europe, ordinarily that's a pretty decent result, isn't it? But there was so much expectation, wasn't there, before this one because of that performance and result against Leipzig. But there's not an air of disappointment. You think everyone's fairly content with you with the point?
There's no doubt, Jane, going into the game on the back of what was such a good performance and result against Leipzig, everyone probably marked this fixture as a really good opportunity to reach that magic 10-point figure that everyone's been talking about. But I think we've seen last night how decent an outfit Club Brugge are. You could see that they're an experienced Champions League and European side. I thought they looked really tidy and just tactically kind of outclassed Celtic in the first half, on and off the ball. So I think gradually as the game wore on, you appreciate the kind of opposition you're up against, and you realise that in Europe, if you're not playing your best, you don't lose the game. And I think it was important to come away with a draw. Of course, an air of maybe disappointment that we couldn't reach the levels of the previous game, and I think that's the test for this Celtic team, is to show that consistency more often, and reach those levels on a game-to-game basis. But overall, I would say content with the draw.
And obviously that the Champions League ambitions are still very much on. There's 3 games left.
That's the thing. I think we know we've still got a couple of fixtures where we can see ourselves possibly picking up points. Celtic haven't been great away from home, so we know Zagreb's going to be a tough one. But I think we're probably all earmarking the young boys at home fixture as the one where we can maybe clinch that playoff place. But we can't take anything for granted. I think last night showed there's no easy games in Europe. And if Celtic can improve the performance again and pick up the levels, we're still hopeful we can get through to the next stage.
Some of the players, Celtic players last night after the game were saying that, that this team, this group of players, that they have grown in confidence, and certainly when it comes to European football, that they're a bit more kind of streetwise, if you like, and a bit more experienced, of course. Do you notice that as a fan?
100%. I was saying that on the way out of the stadium yesterday. That's a game that in years gone by, I think when you play like that, especially in the first half, the game can get away from you. And I think, you've seen that in years gone by, that Celtic would maybe have lost that game. So you did fear that. Yeah, it's in the second half, once we got the equaliser, I felt Celtic looked the more likely team to win at the end. And I think that's a sign of progress in itself. Just that maturity that You're going to have spells in games where the opposition are ahead, but as long as you can ride it out and still come back stronger. And I think that's a real statement from Celtic that, that's 4 out of the 5 games now that we've managed to avoid defeat. So progress from my end.
And of course, next up, Dinamo Zagreb in Croatia, December the 10th. How do you see that one going? Are you going over?
I'm still hopeful. Maybe I can get a ticket nearer the time, but it's I think with obviously their stadium closure, I think it's like half closed as well. But it would be a good trip. Dinamo Zagreb, they've actually been doing not too bad. They got really badly beaten in the first game against Bayern Munich, but they managed to recover and pick up 7 points as well. And then I think they lost last night to Dortmund, so they're still well in the hunt, and they'll still be looking for points as well. So I think it's going to be a tough game. Again, a draw wouldn't be a bad result there. And then we can take it on to the young boys game. But I think we want to see a kind of more mature away performance similar to what we did in Atalanta, and hopefully that would be enough to pick up some points in Zagreb.
Just a final one for you, from you, Asim, on this one. In terms of Celtic and this new Champions League format, for clubs like Celtic, it seems to be working very well, doesn't it?
Well, I think it's been a breath of fresh air. I think the format, just the fact that you're playing 8 different teams, you're up against different managers and different tactics. No more home games, more away games, and yeah, it gives a chance for clubs like Celtic. You've seen how the format's gone. You've got clubs like Real Madrid, Paris Saint-Germain really struggling. I just think it's the competition needed a revamp, and I think a lot of fans of clubs of similar style to Celtic are enjoying it, and that's regardless of whether we qualify. I just think it's a breath of fresh air that the competition needed. So yeah, a long way to continue.
Well, let's move on from the Champions League for now and turn our attention to the Europa League. It's match day 5 for Rangers as they travel to take on Nice, the Ibrox side, currently on 7 points, while the French outfit are just on 2. Joshua, let's catch up with you on this. This is another big European test for Rangers and for Philippe Clement as well.
Yeah, it is, Jane, and I think it's one that they might well do all right in. Rangers' record away from home under since Clement has been manager in Europe, I believe he's unbeaten in 6 European games. As was referenced at the press conference last night, I don't think the issue has been these type of games. The issue has been when they go to Kilmarnock, when they go to Aberdeen, and that question of style and approach from game to game. So Rangers have been pretty good in the Europa League. I think their underlying numbers have been pretty good. Their expected goal difference, I think it's the 4th highest in the competition. I think if you surveyed a lot of Rangers fans looking at this game and then looking at Sunday's game against St Johnstone, okay, that's maybe not the most difficult away game in the Scottish Premiership, but in a weird way there's probably be a bit more confidence that Rangers get a result and a performance in Nice than Perth. So we'll see what happens in that regard, but that's my hunch.
Yeah, it must be kind of quite frustrating for Rangers fans watching on because they get it so right in Europe and then they can slip up domestically as well. Why is that the case? Why is that happening?
Yeah, Philippe Clement last night in his press conference was at pains to point out that it wasn't the style. He spoke to injuries domestically. So I think there's two fronts to the question. The first front is that generally I do think his style is better suited to European football because there's space. If you look at that Olympiacos game, for example, a couple of weeks ago, the lineup was actually the same lineup Rangers started with against Dundee United, which I thought probably wasn't maybe the right lineup. Danilo made a big impact when he came on. He was a different type of striker domestically. The game is so different because, Olympiacos are trying to play a high line. The space is behind the defence maybe as opposed to in between the midfield and the defence, whereas you take that forward to the Dundee United game, and the task is, can you create chances against us when we sit in? And Clement would rightly point to the fact that Rangers created a lot of opportunities in that second half and should have won on the basis of how many opportunities did concede. I wouldn't say domestically that's always been the case. They've not always by far and away created more opportunities than they've conceded domestically, and a lot of that is to do with the fact that I think when there's not space to play into, he wants to play forward quickly, and I just think there's been a bit of a disconnect. And on the topic of injuries, he has lost a lot of wingers. He has lost a lot of attacking players. I still think he has enough players to put on better domestic performances than you've seen, because actually, if you take his kind of year in the job, the results have tailed off after that home defeat against Motherwell Rangers suffered last season, which really derailed their title bid. That's when they lost Oscar Cortez and Abdallah Sima. He's not really had a fit out-and-out winger since then. Cherney's maybe a player who wants to move inside. He's not really altered that much what he's done, and I think that's what's frustrated Rangers supporters, is it's felt like he's fitting players into the system as opposed to trying to maybe do something different when you don't have players for that system, notably out wide. So that's the two sides of the question, I'd say, as to why maybe the results have been better in Europe when there's the space to play into, like Malmo away, like Olympiacos, compared to the domestic games we see Rangers play.
There was a wee spell, wasn't there, recently when Clement was under pretty severe pressure. Is that pressure still as intense, do you think? And what are the Rangers fans' kind of overriding feelings with their manager?
Yeah, I think it is still there, and I think it is still intense. What you'd say is that it's not exclusive to Clement, that anger and frustration. It's a long story, a big picture of the last few years. And again, Clement in his press conference last night wanted to point that out. I wanted to reference the fact that it's not about the last year, it's about the last 4 months, citing the amount of off-field change, citing the executive structure, which has been in constant upheaval. And all that, I think, can be right, while at the same time you can look at Rangers, especially domestic performances, Jane, where they've scored, I think, 17 goals in 12 league games. You can look at that and say, that's not great, and that doesn't point to huge signs of progress. So I think that's the difficult balance that Clement is in. He had results when he came in. His football was quite direct, but it was effective. He's not been able to build that consistency both in results and performances when they've had a good result. Rangers, whether it be Malmo away, it's always been followed up by a difficult result as well, and they've not been able to really kick into gear this season at all. He'll again look at the injuries and say, going into December, we're going to have a stronger squad. We can maybe build that momentum. But look at the fixtures and that Old Firm Cup final coming up in a couple of weeks' time, just after Spurs. That is a couple of fixtures that will bring any situation at a football club to a head. So I would say the pressure remains very, very intense. And while there's a desire within some quarters, to not change things every winter time, to give a manager some time, there's also an acceptance of that time has to come with signs of progress that are there week in, week out. And as I say, especially in domestic competition.
Obviously, there's been big changes at the boardroom level over the past week or so. Of course, they've got the new technical director, and then Patrick Stewart just been appointed the chief executive. Are these changes significant, and how does that kind of tally in with Philippe Clement and the role that he's got to try and do on the field?
Yeah, I think the Patrick Stewart one is important because by all accounts he will be given the influence that a CEO should be given, and this is a change from the Rangers chairman maybe being the individual who has the final say, and Niels Coppin's promotion to technical director. That doesn't necessarily, I believe, give him hiring and firing jurisdiction over the manager. It should allow to a bit more alignment behind the scenes, because Coppin's a good example. He came into Rangers this time last year to complete a football board. It was a new structure under the CEO, James Bisgrove. And by 6 months in, I think over half of that board has left. And actually, Clement, aside from the club doctor, Mark Waller, was the longest serving member of that board. Rangers' issue over the last few years has been that their football and ideas, everything has flowed from the manager. And that's led to so much change and flux. It's led to then the next manager getting a job in a difficult situation, trying to build a different style of play, trying to influence recruitment. There's a reason that most clubs have that strong football and executive structure behind the manager, and the manager comes in as the final piece. So I don't think that this is the end of that structure being in place. I still think there needs to be some further appointments. I still think there's that oversight of who has the football nous that is the person that the manager reports to. Again, like most clubs have with a sporting director of football model, who is paid to make those big decisions, just like as a director of football is paid to make those big decisions about transfers. That is one of the big reasons Rangers are in this situation, I think, why they've pivoted from manager to manager, idea to idea. And I think Rangers fans hope that this is a sign of a little bit more consistency in an area off the pitch that they've had absolutely none for the last few years.
Let's take it back to this evening's game. What are you expecting Rangers away to Nice? Obviously, in Europe, the signs are there that there is kind of some progression and decent performances. Are you expecting more of the same from that point of view?
I think that, was it 6 games I said that Clermont's unbeaten away from home in European competition. Nice, I've drawn 2 and lost 2. Not the best start to their season. I haven't seen a little bit of them. I think they'll be quite aggressive, and again, that'll give Rangers the space to play into that they seem to enjoy in European football. You don't have any concerns that they're necessarily going to be caught in the headlights of a big European night or it's going to take them unawares. They are in a good position there. It's important to remember that. Clermont will point to that as signs of progress, and I think for him it's important that he gets a performance, in particular heading into the weekend, to try and change the mood somewhat, because I guess the good and bad thing from his point of view is that the games are every 3 days at the moment, and as you mentioned earlier, that frustration, that pressure that exists is going to very quickly come to a head one way or another, because there is so much kind of football coming up.
Well, finally, on to our third European competition of this episode, because Hearts, of course, travel to take on Cercle Brugge this evening. They're looking to build upon the 6 points they've already taken from their 3 games so far. Well, to find out what sort of opponents they'll be facing, Liam McLeod's been speaking to Scott Coyne, host of the Belgian football podcast. He also asked him a little bit about the aforementioned Philippe Clement.
Scott, we got to know Cercle Brugge a bit earlier this season when they knocked Kilmarnock out of Europa League qualifying. They would then go on to lose to Molde in the next round. And they're having a fairly torrid season, aren't they?
Yeah, it's been a difficult one for them. I mean, last season, they had an extraordinarily good season, really strong, consistent, finished in playoff 1 in Belgium, which is the championship playoff for the first time in their history, and were rewarded with European football. They had this kind of perfect storm over the summer where they lost a number of really key players from that side, which wasn't unexpected. They knew that was going to happen. They were very proactive. They brought in a number of replacements, a lot of them very young, because that's their operating model: bring them in young, develop them and accrue value. And in truth, they've kind of struggled to bed some of the new players in a little bit, get them used to the playing system. There's been a lot of rotation just to try and help get players up to speed as quickly as possible. And they've also struggled a little bit with juggling domestic and European football, which is obviously not something they're used to. So a kind of combination of circumstances really have worked against them. There have been some signs in recent weeks of an improvement in form, but it's not really digging them out of certainly that relegation zone that they're kind of sitting in and around at the moment.
The Hearts supporters who are looking at Cercle's current form, their eyes will probably light up when they see that they have been struggling for good consistency. They lost 1-0 to Standard Liège on Saturday. It was a 5-0 defeat at home to Anderlecht, who've, it's all relative, but they've had their own problems in recent years. How vulnerable are they? And is this a game, perhaps due to their form, that Hearts can target 3 points from, which would ultimately, you would think, take Hearts through to the next phase?
I think Hearts will be coming into this game with real confidence. They'll know that a win puts them in a really good position. And Cercle have had a bit of a love-hate relationship with Europe this season, in truth. They had an unfortunate experience earlier against Vikingar, where they took the decision not to take some of the more senior players to Iceland for that fixture, rest some of them because of the situation domestically, and really it didn't work out well for them. They were well beaten on the night, and I think that was quite damaging to them psychologically, and I think it did disturb the camp actually. So I think it's frustrating for some of the senior players in that Cercle squad, because they worked very hard last season to be rewarded by European football, and then the European football seems to have kind of taken sort of second place to their domestic troubles, and they are very much leaning now towards putting all of their resources in to try and pick those points up domestically. They'll also be missing Kevin Denke, of course, as well. Top scorer in Belgium last season, suspended for this game as well. He was sent off in the last European game against Lask. So from an offensive point of view, they're not going to have the options at their disposal that they would normally have. And I think this is going to be quite an intense, really physical game, this one. And I think Hearts can definitely get something out of this fixture.
It's very difficult when you're struggling domestically to try and turn your form round in Europe. We saw Aberdeen actually have to deal with that last season with Conference League football, where they were performing pretty well despite the troubles they were having in the league. How have they been juggling? I mean, you mentioned they've had their issues with European football this season, but how much of an impact has it had? Can you compare it to what Aberdeen were going through last year when you look at their lowly league position?
Yeah, I think it is very comparable. I mean, in Cercle's case, I think a lot of it has to do with the youth of the squad. It's the youngest side in the Belgian Pro League just at the moment, and has been for kind of quite some time. And I think when you're working with players who on average are between sort of 19 and kind of 22 for the most part of the squad, it's difficult to get that consistency. There's a lot of travelling involved, obviously. You know, there's not a lot of time to prepare for certain games in a way that you would normally have. So the whole routine from a squad management point of view is very different. And I think when you have so many new players in there, it just adds complications. And I think some of the players have struggled a little bit to get used to their playing system, which has disrupted lots of things. And with Kevin Denke, obviously, him being distracted for a little while, his on-off move over the summer, which didn't happen, which has now happened with him going to the MLS, that's disturbed the camp a little bit. So I think there has been a general kind of loss of focus, which they're starting to kind of get a grip of now. Certainly from a domestic point of view, I think Europe is still seen as a bit of a bonus for them. I think they will be looking to take advantage of the fact that they're playing at home in this game, and I think that will help them because their home form has generally been better this season.
It's funny, I'm comparing Cercle's problems domestically to Aberdeen of last season, but of course you can look at Hearts this season. They've obviously had their problems in the Premiership, whereas Europe has been a good kind of distraction for them, and they've got a real chance. I think just one more point. We've been talking about the supercomputer in the podcast this week. I think 7 points will be enough to get you through to the next phase in the Conference League. So Hearts will be looking for that. While we've got you, Scott, we'd be remiss not to ask you about the speculation around Philippe Clement, the Rangers manager. He's been linked with the Belgian national team job quite a bit recently, and you know Tedesco's been coming under intense pressure. Is Clement a serious candidate to replace him should that happen?
I think this is a really interesting one because there's been a big change at the top of the Belgian FA recently. There's a new technical director coming into post, Vincent Manner, who used to be the chief executive at Club Brugge, funnily enough. Left Club Brugge a few months ago, and he's taken over as the new technical director at the FA. Now, Vincent's got a very close relationship with Philippe Clement. They worked very well together when Philippe was at Club Brugge. We won 2 back-to-back titles, of course, during this time there. So the links really are kind of coming through that relationship. I think he probably is. I mean, he's under a lot of pressure at Rangers at the moment, and I think a lot of the Rangers fan base are really frustrated with him for various reasons. I think there's a lot of football and operational reasons behind the scenes why Rangers have been struggling a little bit domestically. So the challenges that they have and that Philippe's been grappling with are not necessarily all down to kind of his coaching in a way, but of course the coach is always going to carry the ultimate responsibility for kind of pretty much everything. I think he's always going to be closely linked with that now because of that personal relationship with Vincent Manner. There's a couple of other names in the frame for it as well. And I think if the change is made, and I'm not sure it will be yet, because obviously there's the playoff to come in March, there's no urgency to kind of make this decision. I think it is a role that would probably interest him. I think Philippe is quite relaxed about the situation as well at the moment because he knows that they are understandable links, but there's nothing too concrete in this at the moment, as far as I understand from my own Belgian sources.
The Scottish Football Podcast from BBC Sports Scotland.
That's the Belgian football consultant Scott Coyne there. That's all we've got time for this episode. Many thanks to Scott, Asim and Joshua, and thank you very much for listening as well. Full live commentary of Cercle Brugge against Hearts and Nice against Rangers on Sportsound on BBC Radio Scotland Extra this evening from 5 o'clock. Live updates and comprehensive coverage on the BBC Sport Scotland website and mobile app. And of course, reaction and analysis right here on the Scottish Football Podcast. So to make sure you don't miss out, subscribe on BBC Sounds and have your push notifications turned on in your phone. Good luck to both Hearts and Rangers this evening. From us all, bye-bye.
This is the shocking moment English football has been dreading.
My name is Moses Swebu, and I used to be a professional footballer, but then I got in deep with organised crime and became a match fixer operating in the English League.
A match-fixing investigator has highlighted 2 matches he says appear to have suspicious betting patterns.
How honest are you going to be with me?
This is 100%. Join me for Sports Strangest Crimes presents Confessions of a Match Fixer. Listen on BBC Sounds.